in the parable, the man gets this abundance of crops that was a gift to him. It really wasn't because of anything he'd done, just had an exceptional crop that year. And so his plan was to tear down his barns and to build bigger barns to put his crops in. And so I started thinking about, somebody who has so much stuff that they can't fit it into a small house. And so they have to come in and buy a small house and tear it down to build a much bigger house to hold all their stuff that they buy from Walmart and Sears and other places, stuff that they don't really need. So anyway, that became sort of the central metaphor for this painting of this parable. And so I started thinking about it in terms of how to sort of put that image into a painting. And originally I was thinking about doing a painting of maybe kind of like a triptych of 3 different sections. One that would show these 2 houses side by side. They were basically the same size. And then the center panel would be a bulldozer tearing down one of the houses, and the other house still the same size. And then the third one would be this humongous house next to this smaller house. So I thought about that for a while, but the more I thought about it, the idea of the last panel seemed to take more precedence in my mind. And in several of the parable paintings I've done in the last several years, I've used a device where I've had a central image in the middle of the painting with a border that goes all around the painting with different images in it. And I got that idea from looking at medieval paintings, and here's a painting of Elijah, and in the middle of the painting you have kind of a portrait of Elijah, and then all around the border you have these little vignettes that talk about different aspects of the life of Elijah. And I thought, well, that's a cool idea. And so I started using that same idea in my painting, where I'll have a central image in the middle of the painting, and then around the border I'll have different images that relate to the image in the middle. And so they develop a kind of conversation back and forth between the middle picture and the images around the border. So I started thinking about that in terms of this painting. So I decided to have in the middle of the painting, on the left side, a really big house, and on the right side, this little bitty house. And the one on the left would be kind of this modern, really kind of overblown house, and the one on the right would be this little tiny house. And then rather than, like I had the idea initially of having, kind of telling the story in a triptych, I thought, well, I could tell a story around the border. And so to start off with a picture of the 2 houses side by side, and then the house being torn down, and then the new house being built, it kind of dwarfs the other house. And then I thought I would intersperse that with, get some of these circulars that we get in the paper and go through here and pick out, different items, TVs, appliances, furniture, and put those interspersed all around the border as well, sort of as symbols of the consumeristic culture that we live in that necessitates having to have these big houses. So then I started thinking about, well, really the focus of the parable, it is about, kind of hoarding or being greedy or covetousness, but Jesus was really making the point that that's not the end in itself. The end result of that is really what's important, and that it destroys relationships. So I started thinking about that in terms of how could I visually show that in this painting. And so I decided to think about on the painting, the house on the left, that's the really big house. One of the things I've also done in some paintings in the past is kind of have parts of the houses be like you can see through the walls. In other words, you see the structure of the house, but you actually can look into the house. And so I decided to do that in this painting. And so in the house on the left, I'm going to have, like it's in the dining room, in both of the houses actually. And the one on the left, there'll be this really big table, and there'll only be one person, the man, sitting at this table. And in the parable, it talks about how after the man has foolishly built this big house to store, barns in the parable, to store all this stuff in, then God comes and says, "Fool, this night your life will be required of you." So sitting across the table from this man, I'm going to have the angel of death sitting across the table, sort of beckoning to the man, so that basically to symbolize that his time has come. And even though he's got this big house, he's all alone, he has no one to share it with, and his life is required of him. In contrast to that, in the tiny house next door, there's going to be this rather small table, but in contrast, there'll be this big family sitting around the table. So there'll be a husband and wife and a whole bunch of kids, all crammed into this very small space, in this small house. But to contrast that with the loneliness and the isolation of the man who focused on acquiring material things, focusing on this other family who has not acquired material things, but instead has focused on having a family and raising children. And I think that'll be a really strong contrast, sort of the culture of death and the culture of life.